Right. So, hey guys, so welcome to class session. Today we're going to do things slightly differently. We are going to actually talk about essay three first, or we don't call it essay three, the literary research essay. So, because I want to make sure that you guys understand the specs. I know we have a thesis statement coming up just due tomorrow. So, I want to kind of talk to you guys about that. Before I get into the specifics of that, I want to ask, does anyone have questions about the literature review? We just submitted that last night. I haven't had a chance to look at them yet, but any questions about that? Okay, no questions. So let me share my screen. This is the literary research essay assignment requirements document, and I'm sure that you have all seen this already. But just in case, I want to make sure that we kind of go over it and look at it together. All right, so it's showing that it's sharing, but it's also not showing me. Okay, you guys able to see this okay? Okay, cool. Sometimes there's a lag on Blackboard, so I just wanted to make sure we were all looking at the same thing. Okay, so um, what we're doing is we're using our previous assignments. So our annotated bibliography and our literature review. I apologize for having historiographical essay on there. That's what I used to call it. Literature review is the current. So we have completed the two main components of the build-up for this particular literary research essay. This is now moving into something you're probably very familiar with writing. Okay, essentially it's a research paper, right? It's just focusing on literary analysis. So, what we're going to be doing is writing a typical essay. Now, this essay might be a little bit longer than the ones that you're used to writing. I know most classes, at least at Gwinnett Tech in English 1102, where we start doing literary analysis, it's usually like 4 pages, maybe 5, but we're going to go for 6 to 7 this time round. So, I want to see 6 to 7 pages of well-reasoned literary analysis, and I want you to use evidence to support what you're saying. Now, when I say literary analysis, I mean kind of what we do in our class sessions, right? We find sections of our sources, we ask questions about them, we interpret them, we, read into it and see, okay, well, what can we figure out about this character, or what is this setting reflecting? Now, you might not realize that's what we've been doing in our class sessions, but it is. So we really want to kind of put those skills to use in the literary research essay. Okay. So where we are positioned right now is kind of on number 2 here, right? Include a clearly defined thesis statement that indicates your primary source, your overall argument, and the main points you'll use to prove that overall argument to your reader. Now you might say, okay, well, the main points, what do you mean? This paper is 6 to 7 pages long. We can't do this in, like a typical maybe 3-pronged thesis kind of way. And essentially, what I want you to do is think about your essay as like on like the macro level, right? Because essentially, it's all working toward the same thing, but you're going to have very connected paragraphs, right? Your paragraphs, maybe 2 or 3, are going to relate to one another, and then that'll have like almost like a subheader, even though you don't want to put that actually as a subheader in your essay, right? That'll just be maybe the thing you put in your thesis as a way to look at it, right? Like, say, for example, you want to look at a particular character, okay, and you want to find out something specific about them. Essentially, you could look at maybe in the novel that you're reading, they have a childhood, and then they kind of have this, teenage years, and then they have, adulthood, right? And so a couple of paragraphs perhaps could be about the childhood, a couple of paragraphs about the teenage years, and a couple of paragraphs about adulthood, all related to what it is you're discussing in your overall argument, right? And as I said in the thesis statement video, that overall argument should be, kind of derived from your research question. Okay, it should essentially be the answer to your research question. So that is really how you want to think about your thesis. All right, now I would say that, focusing on a character in the very general way that I just described, maybe don't do that because it doesn't give you enough wiggle room, in terms of like breaking down chronologically for a character. Um, but I'm not saying I was using that as an example. Essentially, it's like the most basic example that I could use to help show you what I mean by groups of paragraphs. All right. So utilize strategically chosen evidence to back up your own analysis and overall argument. So when you make a claim about a text, right, you say, oh, well, this particular symbol maybe helps the reader see this particular thing. All right, well, then you want to use some evidence maybe to show that, right? So most of your evidence is actually going to come from your primary source. All right, like I would say probably 85% of the evidence you use will come from the primary source. And then your secondary sources, right? Your scholarly sources, the ones that we've been working with in terms of the annotated bibliography and the literature review, those are like the other 15%, right? Those are just little things that, maybe provide additional context or give the reader some sort of additional understanding that we wouldn't necessarily have had if we were solely focusing on the novel and the, your own analysis of the novel. Okay. Keep in mind that you should be following MLA formatting consistently. Always make sure to cite both quotations and paraphrases. That's super, super important. Um, sorry. Uh, for this essay, you can only use short quotations, okay? 1 to 3 lines of typed text at a time, all right? And the reason for this is you rarely ever need a longer passage to help make your point, all right? Typically, from what I've seen, when students want to include a longer passage, and I know this from when I was a student as well, everyone would be like, oh, put in a long quote because it takes up like half a page, and then that's like half a page you don't have to write. And I mean, is that true? Yeah, that's true. But it also doesn't help push your argument because a lot of time in longer quotations, there's a lot of extraneous detail that we don't actually need to understand what it is you're trying to argue. So pinpoint the evidence that you want to use and utilize that in your essay. Okay, make sure you include a works cited page that includes all sources utilized. Now, this should be all of your sources, right? You should reference each of your scholarly sources that we've been working with and your primary source. Again, you want to do the 85% primary source usage and probably 15% secondary sources. So, 1 or 2 quotes max from each scholarly source, and then the main bulk will be on the primary source. Okay, but you want to make sure you use that. So when you copy it in from previous assignments, like say you have a perfect works cited page, you got no points off, copy it in, but make sure that the italics stayed, make sure that, everything stayed nice and consistent. All right, and if you are still struggling to get full points on your works cited pages, make sure that you take the time to fix it for this particular essay. All right, because this essay is worth, I want to say it's like a whopping 35% of your entire course grade. So make sure that you are, giving it the time that you need to create it. All right, keep in mind that if you have changed any sources, you will need to update your works cited page to include all the sources you're referencing in your essay. These are just some construction reminders about what to include in the introduction, a reminder that you need a thesis and the body paragraphs, okay? I really, really want to hammer home in this assignment requirements that your ideas and your argument is the focus now. We have focused very heavily on our scholarly sources up until this point, and that's because in order to understand how our ideas fit in, we really need to understand the scope of what's happening in scholarly conversation, right? We need to figure out, we need to get an educated perspective about how we fit in to what people are talking about. And so now we do have that educated perspective, and we can now insert our own ideas here, okay? So your primary source, again, 85% of what you'll reference. Your secondary source is probably about 15% of the quotations and paraphrases you'll reference. But yeah, you want to make sure that your ideas and your argument backed up by the primary source is that main focus. Okay. Just another reminder that we typically have, right, refer to sources in the literary present. The book exists right in front of you, whether that is a hard copy book or a PDF, right? You can go back and look at it at any time. So everything that's happening is happening in the present. All right. So just a reminder, the same thing works for your scholarly sources as well. Keep to third person, use MLA formatting, reference the MLA handbook as needed. Remember to cite everything using in-text citations, and make sure that all in-text citations have a corresponding works cited citation. I think you guys have this part down. And remember to include a works cited page just in case. Anyone might forget that, right? Not just in case in terms of the assignment. Here is a little metaphor here about road trips and how that fits into your ideas. If you would like to see a little bit more of that, take a look at it. We can find this in the lessons folder. So, like if you go into lessons and then it's called research project documents, right under, lesson 1, 2, and 3, you'll see everything that you need. Okay, there's also a sample there as well. So here is our rubric as always. We have assignment requirements, use of evidence, organization, style and grammar, and MLA formatting. So this is very similar to what we've done in the past. And then of course, just our reminder about not plagiarizing and making sure to cite everything that you're referencing from your sources, right? Essentially, another way of saying don't plagiarize. All right, so make sure that you take a look at this assignment requirements document. This is really what you should be having next to you as you're working through your ideas for this essay. And, trust me, if you don't have it around, it might actually even be better to print it rather than view it on screen. If you don't have it with you, you are most certainly going to struggle with this particular essay. Okay, so even though you've done this before, don't get overconfident. Make sure that you're fulfilling the requirements because every essay is different, every class you take is different. All right, so just take a look at the rubric, make sure you're checking out this exceeds expectations column because that's where we all want to be, right? We all want to get an A on this essay, so make sure you are striving for here. All right, so let me unshare my screen here, and I'm just going to ask any questions about that. Okay, cool. Pretty straightforward. All right, so let's take a look at our readings for for today. So we have I2. Actually, both of these, before we get started, are by Langston Hughes, right? So we have I2, the poem by Langston Hughes, and then we have The Mule Bone, which is a play by Langston Hughes and Zora Neale Hurston, right? So it was co-written together, and there's kind of a lot going on in that play. So there's definitely a lot that we're going to unpack there. Okay, but first, I want to talk about I2. Okay, I want to kind of talk about this poem. So if you, don't have it in front of you, I would strongly recommend pulling it up. This is a very short poem. And so, we can kind of do some analysis on the fly here. So I'm going to start off with just the beginning, right? The first line, I too sing America. That's kind of weird, right? It's not, it, it- like, I don't know. I don't walk around saying I sing America, right? Have you ever said that phrase? It's kind of a strange construction here. So I too sing America. What would that mean? Why would he be singing America? What do you do when you're singing? Praising, absolutely. Rossi, you're absolutely right, right? So praising America, right? So singing has a very like celebratory or religious connotation. as you can see from the word praising, right? We've got this idea that singing America, right? You can sing something's praises, right? And we do get the feeling that that's what Langston Hughes is trying to say here, and we find out later in the poem that Langston Hughes obviously has lived a tough life. America has not necessarily been kind to him, and yet he still is celebrating, he is still praising the idea behind America. And what is the idea behind America, right? The thing that the United States likes to say we are or we do. Freedom, absolutely, right? Freedom, and not just freedom for the people who were born here, right? Because I mean, we have literally the Statue of Liberty as a monument to our interest in bringing people into this country and giving opportunity, right? And so, okay, so we can see later in the poem that that doesn't extend to everyone, but, Langston Hughes here is saying the concept of America. I sing the praises of the concept of America, the idea behind it. Now, whether that idea comes to fruition in a perfect way or not, that's another question, right? Um, of course, we find out right away, I am the darker brother, right? So there's um, an obvious reference to race, right? Langston Hughes, um, a black man, or we can think about this more metaphorically, right? I am the darker brother, meaning, like the black sheep of the family kind of thing, right? Like someone who is other in some way. And in this case, both of those tie in together when we see the next line, they send me to eat in the kitchen. So who is they? They send me to eat in the kitchen. White people, yeah, 100%, right? So it is white people who are sending him literally to eat in the kitchen, rather than join the party per se. Um, and at the same time, we also again get that double meaning. Send me to eat in the kitchen could mean literally send me to eat in the kitchen, or it could be a representative of a segregated community, and who is at fault for the segregation? White people, right? Whether it's a literal kitchen or it is a community, that is being removed, I guess, from society. Yeah, ultimately, he's saying this they, right, is someone who is damaging the community that I am part of, right? That is what Langston Hughes is trying to say, right? So they send me to eat in the kitchen when company comes. So that also suggests, that even if there is an opportunity to eat elsewhere, right? Eat, whether we're talking symbolically or we're talking literally, um, you know, when it's just when no one's looking, basically. As soon as someone looks, well, then we have that, kind of response, that kind of push out of the way, and, you know, segregation and all of that kind of thing. Okay, and the violence and negativity that comes with it. And he says, but I laugh and eat well and grow strong. Those three lines, but I laugh and eat well and grow strong. What is he suggesting here? Is this something, is he wallowing in the negativity? Is he, um, is he absolutely flourishing? Is he still working on himself? What do you think? No? Okay. So the suggestion of "but I laugh," right? Oh, okay. So he's working on building a tolerance to it. Okay, sure. That's definitely a possibility. But the connotation doesn't seem like he is building a tolerance to this kind of segregation and racism that he is struggling with. It almost seems like he is, you know, building in spite of it, right? I laugh. I eat or well, I laugh and eat well and grow strong, right? Like he's literally doing this despite being disadvantaged in a lot of ways, right? And despite having, um, you know, people from the white community, uh, disparaging him, right? So he is literally saying like I will do these things that make people people, right? I laugh, so I enjoy myself. I eat well, I grow, right? And then not only do I grow strong, right? So he is growing internally and externally in ways that maybe someone wouldn't expect knowing his background, right? And then we see tomorrow I'll be at the table when company comes, right? So again, company is coming, but he'll be at the table. When is tomorrow? Is it his literal tomorrow, like the day after he sits down to write this, or is this a figurative tomorrow? Yeah, it's figurative. So he's saying, no, maybe not the literal tomorrow, this is going to happen, but I will be accepted. My community will be accepted. And then, we will thrive, right? He follows it up by saying, nobody will dare say to me, eat in the kitchen then, right? He's saying once there's this recognition of um, my humanity, basically, right? Once this switch gets flipped and people realize, then, there would be no reason to tell me to eat in the kitchen. But not only will there be no reason, nobody will dare say it, right? And I kind of get that notion of, he will become so vital that nobody will dare say it from the next stanza, right? Besides, right, which is a little weird, besides, because that kind of suggests like aside from that, right? Like, oh, and also, they'll see how beautiful I am and be ashamed, right? So not only is it that he is he is growing, he is becoming more vital to the community more broadly than just his specific community, that he will be able to command attention in a way, in a positive way. But it's not only just going to be positive because he is vital, it'll be positive because he is a beautiful addition to the community that is in power as he is writing, right? So rather than have a system in the United States based on race, he's saying like once that goes away, they'll see how beautiful I am because that kind of demarcation is not going to be present any longer, and people will see how beautiful he is. They will recognize his humanity. They will recognize his positive contribution, and not just because of what that means for white people, right? He's saying they're just going to recognize that like everywhere is better if everyone is free and welcome, right? And they will be ashamed of their dark past, right? And so he ends this note, or he ends this poem on this note: I too am America. Now that is so closely mirroring I too sing America. What is it? Why do you think that he ends on I too am America? Nothing? Okay. So we talked about singing America and having the correlation between singing and praise or celebration. But now M is, oh, okay. So you're saying, Rusty, you say he's saying that despite his race, he's just as American as the white people. Absolutely. 100%. And he's saying, I have helped build America, right? My race has helped build America. It has helped make the United States what it is, and it will continue to do that, right? He's saying, this is my mark, my contribution. Everything that I do ends up working toward the common goal. And he is, he is American. He recognizes that in himself. And again, it's the metaphorical characteristics of the United States, or the ones that are on paper, I guess, let's say, because it's not really metaphorical. That is literally what it says in the Constitution and all of those documents, and yet in practice that's not happening. And he's saying, like, it should be, and I am, right? And he's making no bones about it, right? So it's this sense of pride that he has, personal pride, pride for his community, pride for the America that could be. All right. So you know this poem, there is a lot more to unpack in here, but I do want to be able to talk about the play as well. So I want to kind of switch over to that. We have about a half hour for that, so very, very cool. Any questions about the poem before we move into talking about the play? No. Okay. For the record, if none of you have tried Coke Starlight, that limited edition one, it kind of tastes like cotton candy. Um, so if you weren't sure if you wanted to give it a go and you like cotton candy, you absolutely should. And no, Coke did not pay me to say that. I just took a sip and it was a really good one. Right? It is really good. Okay, I'm glad it's not just me. All right, so we have the mule bone. It's not the full text of the mule bone. That would have been ridiculously long. This actually cuts off like right as the conflict ends, which is interesting, also a little weird. But I didn't want to give you like a bazillion pages of reading. I think 40 was enough. Um, so we have this play, right? The first two acts of this three-act play. And the first thing that I want to point out is right on the first page, we have a list of characters. Now, I would imagine most of you have read a play before, but there's something that's a little bit unique about the list of characters on here. And one, it is an extremely long list of characters for such a short play. But another thing is that, not every character is actually on here. Usually, when you have a list of characters, you have like every person with a speaking role, their character is listed in this list of characters. And that doesn't actually happen here. And I would venture to say that the reason that it doesn't is because we don't really need it to. Okay. I would say that a big theme of this particular play is the type of community that these characters have built. Now, we see this community stemming from, the mayor, so Joe Clark. He's also like the main general storekeeper, and he is also the postmaster. Like he's in charge of a lot of stuff. Um, let me just ask right off the bat, is it good when like one person, like the mayor, is also in charge of like the major economic hubs of, excuse me, of a town? Yeah, I think you're right, Rossi. No, it's not. It's dictatorial, right? So he is literally the one in control of the economy and he's in control of the legal side of things. And so that really limits what other people are able to do, right? Is there an opportunity for economic growth for others? Probably not, because Mayor Clark's going to be annoyed that it's cutting into his business. You know, we do see that there are some things that maybe he doesn't sell at his store, but for the most part, if someone needs it, he's got it, and everyone uses his store, right? It literally just revolves around him. So, we do see some political conflict here between Joe Clark and Elder Sims, who is the Methodist minister. He's a newcomer. He is trying to engage with the community, but he's doing it in a way that's very critical. And Joe Clark is not happy about this. So we see that kind of discussion. Let me find it here real quick. We see that happening. Oh, I think it's in the late teens in terms of pages. Yeah. Um, so we see that Elder Sims comes out of the um, he comes out of the general store, and he just kind of starts, you know, he starts off by saying, "How do children? Right warm for this time in November, ain't it?" Right. And so, he has a normal conversation, right? Kind of small talk, that kind of thing. Um, and then he says something to his child, because his child says that Nunky's trying to lick my candy, right? So, Reverend Sim or Elder Sims, his kid has some candy and another child is trying to lick it. Like, I mean, that happens, right? If other kids don't have candy, they're going to try to get candy from the kid that does. And Sims said, I told you to go on and leave them other children alone. And that's on page 18. So right away, we see Elder Sims as separating himself and his family from the community, which is interesting because from the list of characters, we know that he is the Methodist minister, right? So in terms of community, like that should essentially be his flock, right? So he should be kind of mingling, having his family mingle, getting to know people. He's still a newcomer. He's still trying to make his way, right? Think about the parson in the minister's black veil, how tight knit the community was with him, inviting him around to lunch and things like that before he started wearing the veil, right? And so here we have Elder Sims, who is distancing himself right off, right? That level of connection and community with the town really isn't there. And then, he expounds upon that on page 19 when he says, This show is a snake town. I certainly can't raise no chickens for 'em. They kill my little bitties just as fast as they hatch out, right? So he's critical. He's saying, okay, there's a lot of snakes around here. Now, at this point, that could basically be like an environmental thing, right? Like, well, who's in charge of getting rid of the snakes? Does someone actually get rid of snakes at this point in time? Is it actually Elder Sims who's supposed to be getting rid of the snakes on his property? I would venture to say yes, it's probably Elder Sims. So, he has this kind of sense of entitlement about him. He says, and yes, if I hadn't cut them weeds out of the street in front of my parsonage, me or some of my folks would have been snake bit right at our front door. Um, and then he asks a question, why don't you all cut down these weeds and clean up these streets? Right. And I mean, of course, like who is you all? Like he can kind of put that out there, but I mean, who do we see in terms of controlling the community? We see Lum, who seems like a pretty ineffective police person, right? Like a maybe I don't know, I can't remember exactly what they call him, the marshal maybe. Um, and then we see the mayor, right? This community is fairly small, right? Um, at least the central hub of the community, right? Where we see everyone at the general store. And so, who is he talking to? And who is he being critical of? I mean, probably Joe Clark, just saying. And, one other thing that I want to point out is that throughout this play, there is conflict between the Methodists and the Baptists. And I have to admit that even for myself, it's a little bit hard to keep up with who is Methodist, who is Baptist. But, we do know that Joe Clark and Elder Sims are both Methodists, right? So there shouldn't be a struggle there. Yet there is. So it's a suggestion that politics supersedes religion in that sense. Um, and so Hambo says, well, the mayor ain't said nothing about it, right? About cleaning up the streets. Um, and then Sims, he has this solution, which I mean, it's very similar to the modern day solution, which is essentially when what's he say? When the folks misbehaves in this town, I think they ought to lock them up in a jail and make them work their fine out on the streets, and then these weeds would be cut down, right? So misbehavior leads to physical punishment, which leads to cleaner streets. Does that work in the 21st century? Not really. Is that going to work in the smaller community? Probably not, right? Um, and then of course we find out that there is no jail in this town. Well, then of course Sims is back up on his soapbox, right? Well, you show needs a jail. You all needs a whole lot of improvements around this town. I ain't never pastored no town so way back as this one here, right? So he's essentially saying, okay, well, you guys are very much out of the ordinary. You are not living in this century. You are living in the past. This development needs to happen. We need to grow as a town, and we need to do that by incorporating the same institutions that other towns and cities have. Of course, Joe Clark doesn't like this. We see kind of that conflict starting. He says, what you say about this town? Right? So we have that conflict, right? We see Joe Clark feeling proud of the community that he's built, right? Because he says, don't you reckon the man who knows how to start a town knows how to run it? Right? So we see a little bit more about Joe Clark here, right? He becomes even more dictatorial in the sense that, not only is he the mayor and the postman and the general store owner, but he's also the one who bought the town and built the town. So he really has his hands in everything, and that really just gives some I guess some credence to what Elder Sims is saying, right? He's saying, we can't just be in, under the thumb of one man. We need to, uh, start taking some advice, observation from others and utilizing that in our town. Okay. So that is, kind of uh, one of the major conflicts we have here. He even says other towns has jails. Every town I ever pastored had a jail. Don't see how come we can't have one, right? So, there's this um, constant comparison, okay? And of course, this is going to happen because he's new. He still has another set of experiences that he's building on from other places he's lived. Um, and then, of course, he ups the ante again. We're still on page 19. Well, there ain't no sense in one man staying mayor all the time. Okay, he's just like really going after Joe Clark and saying like, hey, you aren't doing what's in the best interest of the community. You aren't building the community. You are just letting things stay exactly the same. And as soon as development stops, then what do we have? We have stagnancy. And that stagnancy is really coming to play here. All right. So, you know, we we kind of have the conflict. Sims cracks me up. He's so he just goes right for it. He doesn't play games. Um, but we have that conflict. We also have the obvious conflict between Jim and Dave. Now, I will say the conflict between Jim and Dave definitely also involves Daisy. Love triangles are no joke. Okay. We find out right in the beginning. Oh man, I can't remember the exact line or where exactly it was, but it was essentially saying, let me see if I can find it super fast because I think they really hit the nail on the head, whichever character said it. Hmm. All right, I can't find it, and I don't want to waste your time, but it's essentially, you know, someone is saying that, you know, the only thing that gets between best friends is a love interest, is essentially what they said, right? If there is a common love interest, there will be conflict. And of course, we see that conflict play out. We see it play out, um, you know, in terms of, let's see, I can't remember exactly where I was going with that. We see them initially together, and there seems to be a little bit of tension, but nothing bad. Um, you know, but we we also see as soon as Daisy comes back into the mix, like as soon as she's mentioned or she is present, well, then they just turn into a bunch of dopes, right? They just start fighting with each other, Jim and Dave. And you know, we see, let's see, an old woman on page 22 says, "You all ought to be ashamed carrying on over brazen heifer like Daisy Taylor. Just 'cause she's been up north and come back, I reckon you cutting the fool show enough now. She ain't studying, none of you all know how. All she wants is what you've got in your pocket," right? So, is that kind of mean and pointed against Daisy? I mean, yeah, maybe, but is that maybe accurate? It could be. Who knows, right? We don't see enough of Daisy except when she asks for gum, and then the boys trip over themselves to go and get it for her, right? So we do kind of see a little bit of that, but this old woman gives us some insight that we wouldn't have been able to see just from the dialogue between them. Okay. And we see Jim's response. I likes her, but she won't get nothing out of me. She never did. I wouldn't give a poor consumpted crippled crab a crutch across the River Jordan. Right. So, a little hyperbole there, but you know, is this an accurate statement? No, because he's stumbling over himself to get her gum. And then we see Dave. I ain't gonna give no woman nothing. It would be I wouldn't give a dog a donut if he tread on a terrapin, right? So like again, it's just this sort of like no, no, but also like the competition between coming up with the weirdest um expression, because I mean I actually looked these up and neither of these, I wouldn't give a poor consumptive crippled crab a crutch to cross the River Jordan, or I wouldn't give a dog a donut if he tread on a terrapin. Neither of those are actual phrases, right? So they're trying to outdo each other in the types of language they're using. Okay. um and yeah, so we kind of start seeing that happen. But then Daisy comes up. Which page is that? She comes in on page 24 with Jim and Dave there on the general store porch, and things get wild, right? Daisy's giggling, right? She's turning on the charm. And then she says, "I see you two boys always playing and singing together. That music sounded right good floating down the road," right? So Jim and Dave are playing music together, and the description is most of the dancing stops, the music slows down and then stops completely. Dave and Jim greet Daisy casually as she approaches the porch. So Jim and Dave are the only two who greet her. They're the ones playing the music. The music kind of winds down. So they're obviously like watching her approach. And then the two of them are still vying for her attention, even if it's not aggressive, right? So, and everybody else is there to watch the show at this point. So we see Dave start showing off dancing, okay? And then we see uh, Jim asking Daisy, "What do you want in the store?" Right? And so right away, what's this? 2 pages later, we see Jim going against what he said. He is straight up about to go buy something for Daisy to try to sway her into, uh, you know, liking him better than Dave. But then, of course, as Jim, is asking this, Um, Dave decides to go into his pocket to pay for the gum, right? So he sneaks in there, Daisy says that she wants bubble gum. Guess what? Jim pulls a packet of bubble gum out of his pocket and gives some to her. And so now we're just seeing this comedy of, Daisy kind of pulling the strings, being the puppet master, and Jim and Dave dancing for her, basically. Dave goes in to buy gum. Jim pulls gum out of his pocket and just hands it to her. So then, of course, Dave comes out, and the stage direction says that he is slightly peeved and surprised. So we see that he gets annoyed that Jim gets to her first. Okay. And of course, Jim has to rub it in, right? Oh, you's late. She done got gum now. Try that yourself, right? So he's like, you enjoy the gum. I got Daisy. It's fine. Um, and then Dave starts throwing accusations about Jim stealing a white man's chickens. Um, so then we see an escalation, right? Because they're like making fun of each other, but they're making fun of each other in a way that is meant to be very pointed and to be a little bit more aggressive than it needs to be. Okay. And everybody else is kind of around. Um, Eating stalks of cane, just kind of like what they've been doing. Um, like life goes on around them while this little conflict is happening. Um, so then the community wants them to play music. Okay. And again, music is like, if you remember from earlier in the play, they play music for the white folks all the time, right? That's their job. So they sing, they dance, they play music. And so people are asking them to do this. And, of course, it's something they take pleasure in, something they enjoy, but then they can't even thoroughly enjoy it with Daisy around because then they get into a conflict about why people actually pay them the money they do to make the music. Well, is it because of Dave's singing? Or is it because of Jim's dancing? And they can't agree one way or another. This is just traditional rivalry, and it just, we see this, it's almost like this gets sort of like slammed on top of the community dynamic that we were seeing earlier, because before Jim and Dave and Daisy came into play, right, we saw a community that was very much like slapstick humor. They were making jokes at one another's expense. They were making, of course, they were kind of playing on some of the isms, right? We had a little bit of sexism going on, we had some classism, but we also got to see the dynamics of a family, right, with Mrs. Roberts. And that was, I think, in the first couple of pages. I think it was like page 3. Yeah, on page 3, we saw Mrs. Roberts. Apparently, she has a professional whine, um, saying that her husband uh, isn't much and she ain't much and the chillin' is Polly, right? So her kids are starving. Her husband isn't doing much to contribute. She can't do anything because her husband isn't contributing. And she is begging for some meat to feed her kids. But it's confusing because we also see a little bit earlier that, you know, let's see, where is the line? Joe Clark, right, the manager of the general store who knows the things that people buy in his store, says, "I got Jake Roberts buys more rations out this store than any man in this town. I don't see to my maker what she do with it all. Here she come," right? So this idea that, you know, Mrs. Roberts is somehow being neglectful of her duties because she's not utilizing the food. And when Joe Clark calls her out on it, he says, "Every time I look, this is again still page 3, every time I look, you's round here begging for everything you see." Um, and she says, "Ain't you doing nothing for me? And you see me and my children starving," and he goes to the store, he gets the stuff, right? So, and she starts telling him how big a piece of meat that she wants. And I mean, how is that going to go over? Right? You ask for something for free because your kids are starving, and then you start off asking for specifics. Is that gonna go over well? Mm-mm. You're absolutely right. That's not gonna go over well. Because essentially, like someone is giving you something. You can't be too you can't be too specific about what you need when someone's giving it to you unless they tell you to be, which Joe Clark does not do that, right? Very much his demeanor is, I don't want to give you anything. I don't actually think you need anything. So like you'll take what I give you, right? And everybody around seems to agree with this same thing. So back on page 3, we saw Matt Brazel say, "If she was mine, I'll be hen fired if I wouldn't break her down in the loins, good as that man is to her." Right. So, a very graphic depiction of what Matt Brazel would do to keep her in line. And then we see the same thing from Hambo. I wish she was mine just one day. The first time she opened her mouth to beg anybody, I lam her with lightning. Right. So again, another very violent depiction. Um, and so we see this kind of maybe sexism because they're not mad at Jake Roberts, right? They have a problem with Mrs. Roberts because she, I guess, is the one who is consistently coming to ask while Jake Roberts comes with money to buy food. Now, I mean, we don't know anything, and neither does Joe Clark. It could be that Jake Roberts eats all the food on his way home, right? And then the kids have nothing to eat. Like, we really don't know, but there seems to be something going on here, whether it is a mishandling of food, whether that is by Mrs. Roberts or by Mr. Roberts, something is going on, right? But the immediate response of the community is blame Mrs. Roberts and, um, you know, talk about all the ways they would be violent toward her. Okay. Um, so that kind of thing continuously happens here. We also see the ineffectiveness of law enforcement, right? We talked briefly about Lum, who Joe Clark needs to continuously remind to do his job. Uh, get the kids off the porch, get the kids out from around here. Um, Lum, are you planning on lighting the street light, right? All of these things. So, I mean, you hear that, and like these are things that just communities need. And yeah, Lum's not doing it. He's not cutting it. But, Elder Sims would probably say, well, we need more law enforcement around here. So, Joe Clark, when you planning on hiring more? Right? So, there is that tension between the way things are done in this town and the way things could be done. Of course, right? There is always that tension. We also see, of course, again, to bring the conflict back to the major one in the play between Jim and Dave, uh, we see, interestingly enough, that Dave hits Jim on the head with the mule bone that was passed around earlier. Now, why is that relevant that this mule bone was passed around? Well, because we find out a little bit about the mule. It was actually described. Man, I'm not going to be able to find it, I don't think, in the 2 seconds. I did not put my post-it note on it, but it was described that, oh, I found it. Um, it's on the bottom of page 5. Joe Clark says, more folks went to your mules dragging out than went to last school closing. Bet there ain't been a thing right in Mule Hell for 4 years, right? So this mule was obviously a was quite the mule when it was alive, right? And so we also see another example. Liege talks about it. What you reckon that old contrary mule done when he got to that crooked place in the road going around Park Lake? He turned right round and went through the handle of that basket with the boy still up on his back, right? So, this mule was definitely a mule it was something special, right? And maybe not the most obedient mule. and not the most kind mule, maybe a little dumb, but there ain't been a thing right in Mule Hell for 4 years since it died, right? And now, because of the impact of the mule bone on Jim and Daisy, right? The fact that it was there, this is obviously a crime of opportunity. Um, Dave picks up the mole and the bone. Sorry, mole. That's weird. He picks up the bone and just like beans Jim with it, and of course that leads to a trial, right? So you know it's almost as though this mule bone is infused with the disobedient kind of rambunctiousness of the mule, that this becomes the thing that Dave hits Jim with. Okay. So there's a lot more symbolism to unpack in this play. Obviously, we only had a half hour to look over it. But yeah, this is one of my favorite, most dense plays of the 20th century. So hopefully you enjoyed it as well. If anyone has any questions, please don't hesitate to stick around. Otherwise, I'll see you guys next week. Make sure to take a look at that assignment requirements document, print it out if you need it. And if you have any questions, just let me know. All right. See ya.